Hello, everyone. It's Gordon Causey coming to you live and completely unscripted from my little corner of southeastern Ontario, Brighton. If you're brand new to this station, I have a dog. Her name is Candy the Wonder Pup, although she's not a puppy. She's 4.5 years old right now. We named her Candy. Should have named her COVID or Corona because she came in and she joined the family March 18th of 2020. We picked her out in February, and yeah, you're a good girl. And I like to start my videos by giving her a treat. She's getting a bacon treat. These are her favorite. She's incredibly food motivated. What dog isn't? And I make her jump through a few hoops. She is conditioned to me. Thomas, my buddy from the Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken, Sojourner Dedimus. I wish you had just one name. Anyway, shake a paw. Lay down. Speak. Going to be talking about the labor disruptions that are happening in Canada's rail service. And this is going to be important, I think, for Thomas. Thomas is in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is farming is a massive component of the Dutch economy. And I live in a part of Ontario, Canada, that has a large Dutch presence. I attend a church, the Christian Reformed Church, which is, hey, come over here, you just stay here, which is a branch out of the old Dutch Reformed Church, which at one time, and maybe still is, kind of the state government, the way the Church of England is the church, the Anglican Communion. That's for Great Britain and Commonwealth countries. Well, in the Netherlands, it was and maybe still is the Dutch Reformed Church, and the Christian Reformed Church, which exists in Canada and the U.S. primarily, is basically a branch out of it. But a lot of Dutch people in my area, and the Dutch are famous for their farming. And right now we have a rail shutdown that's happening in Canada, and it's an evolving situation. And there's a tendency, I think, for a lot of Canadians, based on the reporting coming out, to think, okay, it's been resolved. The issue is done. What has happened is Thursday at midnight. So right now, Friday afternoon. So it's been all day Thursday, and now 12 plus 3, 15. So, we're around 40 hours in to this situation. There's a tendency to think it's been resolved because yesterday afternoon, Thursday afternoon, around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, sometime around there, Canada's Labor Minister ordered the parties involved, which are Canadian Pacific Kansas City, that's one rail line, and Canadian National Rail Line, ordered binding arbitration between the railroads and the union representing the workers, which is the Teamsters Union, has ordered binding arbitration. They had been negotiating for months to reach a new collective bargaining agreement, but they were unsuccessful. And so the Canadian government waited until past the 11th hour. They waited until CN and CP had shut their workers down, shut their facilities down. They closed the doors, a lockdown, locked out the workers. And then the government came in and said, we're forcing binding arbitration on you. But this is complicated because even as I speak right now, Canada's rail lines are not moving. CNCP are not currently operating. This McKinnon was asked by, hello, Hank Holiday. Now I lost my train of thought. Oh, I'm bad. The joys of doing things live and unscripted. I'm going to read just what Thomas has read, and that will get me back on track. Maybe he's writing about the Reformed Church in the Netherlands. It's complicated. Oh yeah, it's complicated here too, because it was the Dutch Reformed Church, then it became the Reformed Church of America, the Christian Reformed Church, and there are splinters of splinters. It's crazy. We have an official state church, but it's a broader umbrella. Next to that, we have several Reformed denominations that are not part of it. Sounds like the same situation in Canada. And again, Hank Holiday is here. And anyway, the situation with our rail is bad because, as I say, the rails are not moving. Products are not moving. What that means to put this, in a way a farmer will understand it. Farmers planted their crops, they cultivated, irrigated, maintained their fields, and spending all kinds of money, spending money on the seeds, spending money on irrigation, fertilizer. They've been paying. Now they harvest their crops, and now their crops are taken and loaded onto trucks and taken to railroad depots where they're loaded onto rail cars, and then they're transported to other distribution centers. And then from those rail distribution centers, they're taken off the trucks, taken off the rail cars, loaded back onto trucks, and then they're sent out to, eventually, that's how they end up in retail grocery stores. And that system is shut down right now. Like, think of grain in Canada. Western Canada is famous for our wheat crop. And there are grain elevators. They're everywhere. They're an ubiquitous feature of the Western landscape, where wheat farmers bring their wheat, their grain, they bring it to the grain elevator, and the grain elevators then deposit it into rail cars, and it's shipped all over the country. Well, that's not happening right now because both CN and Canadian Pacific Kansas City, what we used to just call CNCP, two different companies, they're not operating. And this is going to get bad. I was just watching, again, this is evolving, at 3-4 p.m. yesterday, sometime late afternoon, mid to late afternoon, Canada, our Minister of Labor, forced the parties into what is called binding arbitration, where the Canadian Industrial Review Board will impose a contract on them. It's binding. But this process takes time. It's not going to happen. It doesn't happen overnight. This Canadian Industrial Review Board has to become apprised of the situation, the negotiating, the points of contention, everything like that. And immediately after that order came down, CN, Canadian National, lifted its lockout of the workers. So their workers were able to return to work, but the trains still are not running because the supply chain is not a light switch. You just don't turn it on and off. Thursday, commuters in Toronto, in Montreal, in Vancouver, in our three largest urban centers, couldn't get to work. Tens of thousands of people were stranded, unable to get to work, or having to find alternative ways, having to drive into work. I imagine if you're driving on the 401, everyone who would normally have been on Metrolinx, on the GO system, was hopping into cars, carpooling, overloading the buses, trying to get into work. And with the rail companies, the GO trains, for example, in Toronto, that's not CN, that's not CP, but they run on Canadian Pacific and Canadian National rails. They run on their tracks. And if the switching operators and the maintenance crews, and if the people aren't there to run the tracks, well, then the GO train can't run. And they were running today, but not in Hamilton, not in Milton. In the GTA, they're saying roughly 10,000 commuters were affected. I'm just going to read what Hank's writing. I'm telling you, big money if you build that train engine. Oh, man. Like, you can build the train engine, but you have to have tracks to run it on. And those, all Canada's goods and services, pretty much everything touches the rails. And right now, the big point is that I'm not an expert on Canadian labor law. I'm something of a generalist. I know a little bit about everything, but I'm not an expert on anything. Jack of all trades, expert on none. And so what has happened is the Teamsters Union has notified Canadian National Railway that they will be going on strike Monday. This is where I'm not an expert on Canadian law, but what I imagine is that within the labor code, that prior to going on strike, that a union is required to give their employer notification warning So that's what I imagine has happened, that they are required to give 72 hours notice of a work stoppage of labor action. And so they have fulfilled that requirement. So as of Monday, they will be going on strike, is what they are saying, and they will not be going to work. And in terms of CN and CP, I'm spitballing it here, but CN has about 6,000-ish odd workers, 6,300, something like that. And then Canadian Pacific has 3,000 odd. So we're dealing with about 10,000, and it's about 2/3 Canadian National and about 1/3 Canadian Pacific. And Canadian Pacific, when that order came down from McKinnon ordering the binding arbitration, Canadian Pacific didn't reopen. The lockdown or the lockout remained in place, and I believe it's still in place. So even if, and that's why I think 10,000 workers, commuters have been unable to travel in the Hamilton and Milton areas, is because those particular rail lines that the GO trains travel over, that they are maintained, managed, the signals and all that is done by Canadian Pacific, and their workers were still locked out. So 10,000 commuters were left high and dry trying to figure out how to get into work today, Friday. Ladybug is here and says, my son fixes trains. Okay, on the rail lines or model trains. I mean, the big thing is the rails have to be operating in this country. I was mentioning it in my video of yesterday, that we are looking at the prospect of boil water advisories being Canada-wide, because chlorine can only legally be shipped by rail in large quantities. And they knew that the rails were going to be shutting down on midnight on Thursday. And so 4 or 5 days prior, the rail companies stopped shipping chlorine because you couldn't have it halfway in transit. Another thing is meat or any products requiring refrigeration or to be refrigerated or frozen. Realizing, we can't have cattle cars filled with frozen beef. We can't have it just sitting on the rails stopped because no one's coming into work. No one's operating the switching equipment. So they stopped shipping this stuff 4 or 5 days ago. And it's still not running now. And so we could be looking at empty store shelves. You could go into the meat department at your local grocery store and it's going to be bones because they're not shipping this stuff. I don't think Canadians, by and large, or even Americans, I don't think a lot of people realize how absolutely vitally important our rail lines are in this country. Thomas writes, rail was nationalized in days yore, but now the railway is semi-government and the trains are private. They're private companies. CNCP are private companies. Something I mentioned on my Facebook feed, I did a post. I'll share it for fun. It's been shared 700, 800 times. I'm not sure how many. It's been, but guess who owns Canadian National Railway? It's a publicly traded company, probably on the NYSE and the Toronto Stock Exchange. Let's see. Let's get my, go away. The joys of sharing. Come on. Let's do the grid. There it is. This is a post I shared to my Facebook wall. And if you want to friend me up on there, you're more than welcome. If you're on Facebook. Facebook is garbage, but everything's running slow. My internet gets slower during the day because there are more people on it. Yeah, 766 shares. CN Rail's single biggest shareholder is, wait for it, the Gates Foundation. It's actually, there's two investment arms of Bill Gates. One is the Gates Foundation, and there's another one, and they combine Gates's ownership position in Canadian National total something in the neighborhood of $16 billion. I think he's somewhere around 13 to 15% in that area. He's the single largest shareholder of Canada's national rail line, our biggest rail line, 2/3 of the Canadian railway infrastructure. And we've got Bill Gates who owns it. And now he also is this, I think he's the single largest owner of farmland in the United States as well. And here we have a major hammering of our farming sector, because it's not just farming, it's everything. There's a tendency to kind of invoke tunnel vision, and people will say, okay, well, I'll fill my bathtub with water and I can boil water and that's okay. Or I'm on a well, or I can load up on bottled water. I don't use the municipal water system for drinking water. Okay, that's just one aspect. Then there's, the farmers and their ability to get their product to consumers. What's going to happen at farmers markets, local farmers markets, where local farmers go and they sell their produce? Prices are probably going to go up. Demand is going to go through the roof if people are going into the grocery store and carrots and celery and lettuce and everything else isn't available because there are no trucks shipping it in, or rather no trains shipping it to the depots where trucks collect it and then bring it to the end user. Or just reading on. Thomas writes, in short, commuting by train is more expensive than ride sharing. I used to work in downtown Toronto, right downtown. I used to work at Yonge and Dundas, and in one of the Toronto Eaton Centre towers. Toronto Eaton Centre, many people will know, it's something of a tourist attraction. It's a major shopping mall, but Cadillac Fairview is the owner of it, and they have 3 high-rise office buildings. I used to work in one of them on Yonge Street, right at Yonge and Dundas, and I used to take the train into work. And from Pickering, where I caught the train, it would be about 20-25 minute train ride in, and it was it made a lot more sense to do that than driving, because driving, I'd be on the 401, then the Don Valley Parkway, and then fighting city traffic, and then having to pay for parking. And it was far more, it was quicker, and it was cheaper to take the train. Armies of tens of thousands of people are feeding into Toronto every day on the rail lines, on the GO train system, from Barrie, from Hamilton, from Burlington, from Oakville, from Vaughan, from Oshawa. Everyone's just tens of thousands. They have trains running every 15-20 minutes into the city. And if these trains are not running, look out. And what they're talking about is on Monday that Canadian National has announced that they've given they did a press conference. The head, or a senior spokesman for the Teamsters of Canada, was giving a press conference. I think it was in Montreal. I'm not sure. You can find it on YouTube. Just type Teamsters press conference Canada. The guy looks, he's French. He speaks with that French Canadian accent there, and he was talking to the reporters, and he actually looks a little bit like Doug Ford's French cousin. He looks like Doug Ford. And they were asking this gentleman, they were asking him if Canada's rail lines, if CNCP, if the rail industry should be declared essential. And he said this was already addressed by a government body, and they determined that our rail service is not essential. And he just basically said, so that's it. It's not essential. That's what the authorities, the powers that be, have said, that the rail system is not essential. So we are allowed to go on strike. And Monday, we are in a legal strike position. We've notified Canadian National. So Monday, we will be going, setting up the picket lines, and Canadian National workers will not be going into work. Canadian Pacific, which is about 1/3 of our rail network, they still haven't ended their lockout of workers. And we're in trouble because we have Mr. Dress Up as our prime minister, who doesn't think about the economy. He's on record as saying that. I don't give a great deal of thought to the economy. He famously said that budgets balance themselves, magic, pixie dust. And what would be required if we had a competent prime minister and a competent government in this country that was concerned with the well-being of Canadians? If we had that, then what would happen is, firstly, it never would have reached this stage. They would have ordered binding arbitration weeks ago to preclude this from happening. Now what needs to happen is there needs to be Parliament has to be called back into session. Parliamentarians, Canada's government is on summer recess right now. They're not due to come back and reopen Parliament until September. Well, what they could do, what Trudeau could do if he had any brains or if he was concerned with the well-being of Canadians, is he would recall the legislature now and order all MPs back to Ottawa and everyone else that's involved in running our national parliament. And that in of itself, that would take a week. It would take a week to get everyone back and get Parliament back up and operating. So, and then the government could introduce back to work legislation mandating that railway workers are legally compelled to return to work, or else they'd be in violation of Canadian law. But even then, that is not an easy thing to do, because to do it in an expeditious, fast manner and to rush it through requires all party consent. You would need the Liberals, the Conservatives, the NDP, the Green, and the Bloc Québécois all to agree to fast track it through. And the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, leader of the Canada's Labour Party, has already signaled that he's in full support of the union going on strike, that it's their legal right, and that we just have to let the collective bargaining process play out. And if Canadians die because they don't have clean water, because the water treatment facilities aren't getting their chlorine, or if the people relying on life-saving medication, if there are things that travel on the rail that go into the production of that medication, well, too bad for them, too bad, so sad, you're just going to have to die, because we got to let the collective bargaining process play out. This is deadly serious. I hope I'm being Chicken Little. I hope that by over the weekend, cooler heads prevail, that CN does not go on strike. But listening to the head of their union, or at least a senior member of their union, they also had a guy from the US who said that the American Teamsters, that side of the Teamsters union, was going to be fully supporting and devoting its resources to supporting the Canadian strike effort. We're in trouble. Anyway, Thomas writes, beware of TP shortages, toilet paper. And you're right, Bill Gates, as I noted in my Facebook post, couldn't believe that it was shared, how many times? 766, was it? Yeah, 766. And it goes up every time I look at it. It's gone up. Yesterday it was at 200 or 300, then it went to, now it's at 767. It's crazy that people were not aware of this. And to be fair, I wasn't completely aware of it either. I knew he was an owner, but it's one of those things that you come across these news stories that, through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that Bill Gates has just increased his holdings in Canadian National and is now the single biggest shareholder. And you read that and you go, okay, well, whatever. And you don't really worry about it because it doesn't impact you. But now you start to piece things together and you realize, hey, we've got, Mr. Sustainable Development Goals and Mr. The Planet is Unlivable. And we've got to find pharmaceutical solutions to every problem facing humanity. And now I believe I'm not saying this factually, but I believe he is, if he's not the single largest owner of a farmland in America, he's one of them. I do think he is the single largest. It's still a very small percentage, but I mean, you think about the amount of American farmland, there's millions, probably 10 million plus hectares or acres of farmland, and he owns the largest single chunk. It's just, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 7%. I don't know what the percentage is. I'd have to look it up again. And now he also owns Canada's rail network, where what comes from the farms gets shipped over, and now it's all shutting down. And it looks very real that this could be a protracted shutdown. industry spokesmen, people from the rail industry itself, are saying that for every single day that the rail system is shut down, that it takes 7 days to recover, because things start backing up. You have ships coming in from China and Europe and all around the world, and they're landing in Vancouver and in Halifax, Quebec City, and they need to be unloaded. Those sea containers, I call them sea containers, have to be picked up by crane and put onto rail cars, usually too high. Well, so those ships keep coming in, and they're just going to be stockpiling. How much space do they have? How much capacity do they have to have this stuff just sitting there? And what is sitting in those sea containers that is vitally important to Canadians, to Canadian lives? I mean, the economy. A company needs hydraulic fluid to run its main machinery that produces whatever they produce, and they're not getting it because it comes, from overseas on a boat, and then it travels by train, then by truck to their warehouse and their production facility. And now we're not getting that hydraulic fluid anymore. Shut the machines down. Everyone go home. This is bad. Sharunya says, so many Canadians have said to me they left because they could not handle the living expenses because of Trudeau. This is an expensive country to live in. The government, and I think Americans should be leery of this, is because what's happened in Canada is they've made the cost of living so high in this country that you're basically, you need government subsidies, government handouts, government programs to survive. Well, they create massive inflationary pressure by things like the carbon tax. And then they give you the carbon tax rebate. They take, here, give us $10,000 here. We'll give you, a few thousand back to help you survive. Well, why don't you just get rid of the damn carbon tax? Thomas says, I guessed right. Things get predictable when you see the play behind the scenes. Absolutely. And Sandy Sanderson is here saying, cheers. Cheers to you as well. TJ would love to know why Melinda divorced Bill. And I think a lot of us suspect that it had something to do with his relationship with everyone's favorite suicide victim. Suicide, right? Jeffrey Epstein and the number of times that Bill is said to have visited Epstein's pedophilia rape island. And look, I'm gonna. You guys all know this, but if anyone doesn't, I tick every box for cancel culture. So, I'm not going. I'm becoming less and less careful in what I say. I'm going to try and be careful when I talk about all things COVID, because I keep getting stepped on. I've had 2 videos taken down within the last couple months, and I've been on a week's restrictions, and I don't want that to happen again. But, in terms of opinions about guys like Bill Gates, you're going to get it full force. What the heck? I'm male, I'm Christian, I'm straight, I'm old. I'm the living embodiment of cancel culture. So bring it on. I'm just going to say what's on my mind. And if you like what I have to say, and if you think I have something to inject to the public discourse, then you're welcome. I think everyone here, Sharunian, TJ, Thomas, and the rest, Sharunian, I think you've all subscribed to the channel. But if anyone's watching and has not and wants to engage, jump onto the live chat, talk with us, introduce yourself, and try and navigate this crazy world, and know that they're as bad as things get. And they are going to get bad, that there is peace, joy, comfort, and salvation to be found in Jesus Christ. I am unapologetic in my profession of the Christian faith. And then TJ goes on to say, a long time since a politician worked for the voters. I think to a degree, those who have absolutely no chance of winning or very little chance of winning are able to promote the idea that they're there for the people. Ron Paul in the United States, I think, was a great example of that. And he was free. He talked about auditing the Federal Reserve Bank, which is not a government agency. It's a privately held corporation, this federal system, the central banks. We like to think of them as being, we think of the Bank of Canada as being a Canadian government institution, but it's a privately held company. In the US, they call it the Federal Reserve or the Fed. And Ron Paul wanted them to be audited, and he wanted to follow the Constitution as written by the founding fathers. And he could say all that because he had very little to zero chance of ever winning the nomination for the Republican Party. I wonder what would happen, what pressure would be brought to bear upon him if by some miracle his support for him galvanized and he became a viable candidate. And I imagine that the powers that be, the beastly powers of this world, would bring pressure to bear on him to get him to knuckle under and to play their game. Or conversely, if he wouldn't play their game, well, then to get rid of him. Sharunian writes, Harrison Faulkner has been calling the nonsense happening in Canada. I'm not familiar with Harrison Faulkner. Another one for me to look up. TJ writes, prices will rise again, I guess. Idea is to make middle class smaller, it seems. I haven't said it for a while, but it's something of my thesis, one of my many thesis little statements, what I believe is happening. When it comes to the Great Reset, I believe that the World Economic Forum, this fourth industrial revolution, is to have the corporate world, the globalist corporate world, these multinational global corporations and the individuals who head them up, the guys like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Soros, and the rest, that they will basically own everything. You and I will own nothing and be happy. They, the corporate, what they call the elite, or they call themselves the elite, they will own everything. We will own nothing. Government will be there to hold the population's leash and to have us under 24-hour surveillance, the surveillance state. And it's basically fascism. It's trying to reestablish what Hitler failed to do in the 1930s and 40s. And one thing I think people need to be reminded of the fact is that when it was the Nazis behind this globalist agenda and eugenics, which is the idea of directing human population and breeding humans the same way that racehorses are bred. Remember the guiding principles of the old Georgia Guidestones that got blown up a couple of years ago. The number one guiding principle was to maintain human population under 500 million. And the second guiding principle was to guide human reproduction wisely. In other words, so you want to have children. I'm sorry, you do not have the characteristics that we are looking for. You're not going to that line. You will be sterilized. We are not going to allow you to reproduce. That was the Georgia Guidestones. That's what they were. And if you don't know anything, I think everyone here who's watching and commenting knows about the Georgia Guidestones. If you don't, look them up. Talk about dystopian, Orwellian, and freaky plans that were held by individuals with enough money, power, and influence to erect almost a Stonehenge-type monument in little Elberton, Georgia, and to do it completely clandestinely so that no one knows who's exactly behind them. Some individual using the pseudonym R.C. Christian paid a monument company in Georgia to build these things and never revealed his actual identity. And you've got to be very powerful, wealthy, and influential to get something like that built. For one, just to get it built requires enormous wealth, power, and influence, and then to do it anonymously, to do it clandestinely, to do it behind the curtain so that no one knows who you are. We're talking about demonic forces here, Masonic demonic forces that are behind the curtain and are directing things. And that's where I bring faith back into it. You had better get into relationship with the author of all life. And the way to do that is through his son, Jesus Christ. I'm just trying to catch up. TJ writes, money changing hands, but where do the tax money go? It's a Ponzi scheme. I mean, our money, the money that is in our wallets and in our bank accounts is a fiat currency. It has no tangible hard value. money now is notional. There's there's no there's no it's not. Back in days gone by, people used to carry around coins, and the coins were made of copper, of silver, of gold, of precious metals with tangible value. And based on the amount of gold, silver, copper in that coin, that determined the coin's value. They used to be concerned with things called clipping, because people would actually clip their coins. It was illegal to clip a coin, but people did it all the time. They had like tin snips, and they would take off little pieces because the metal that the coin was made of had value. And then later we transitioned away from coins and we switched to paper currency. And now it's just a piece of paper. What's a piece of paper worth? Next to nothing. But they were called gold and silver notes typically. And they were like a promissory note that theoretically they were backed up by money held by a central bank, a real government bank. The government had money sitting in a place like Fort Knox. They had gold and silver, and this was leveraged against it. This was, basically like when you write a check on your account. I have $10,000 in the bank. I'm writing you a check. This is a promissory note for $1,000. When you take it to the bank, they'll remove 1,000 of the 10. Well, now the paper that we're printing, there's nothing backing it up. The central banks are basically writing bad checks because there's nothing backing it up except perception. And that's why they call all the world's currencies now fiat, FIAT, and that's the US dollar, Canadian dollar, euro, you name it. Klaus Schwab warns, Hank is writing, Klaus Schwab warns an era of shock events soon. I'm thinking it was 2022. There was the G20 conference in Bali, Indonesia, the 20 largest Western economies. And Klaus Schwab addressed a parallel conference of corporate leaders, and he said to expect more black swan events as we transition into this Great Reset Agenda 2030. And calling it Agenda 2030 is significant because to me, it really moved into high gear in 2020 with the COVID era. That started moving it. I think it was moving before that, but very slow and very incremental. And then in 20, they dropped the hammer, so to speak, and we started moving forward a lot quicker. And they started to put the infrastructure in place for total global surveillance, biometrics, the vaccine passport. If you want to work, you take the mark. You got to take the mark if you want to be a fully participating member of society. And the thing we have to realize is it's 2030. That's still 5.5 years away. We're not even halfway through this agenda. And this rail strike could absolutely further, if Canadians are unable to if our grocery shelves are empty, what's going to happen? A city like Toronto, which is probably about 7-8 million people who live between Oshawa and Oakville and up to Vaughan, the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. And a lot of those people a lot of people living in Toronto in their households, they don't have food to last a week or 2 weeks. And what's going to happen when the shelves are empty? Are we talking about the zombie apocalypse? And Canada's economy is integrated with the United States. I showed a map yesterday that showed the spider web of rail lines in Canada, and they reach all the way down into Mexico. This is so integrated. And there is some overcapacity in the system, but how much? And for Canada, we'll be in deep, deep trouble, but it's also going to impact the US. It'll impact Mexico, probably other countries as well. Thomas writes, he's got a big word. I have trouble pronouncing that word. I've read it often. Obfuscate my language online for the algorithm. The Minority Report System. I talk about COVID or KNORA, wrong enough to not hit, but clear enough for humans in context. Okay. Yeah, you do your best impression of Archie Bunker from the old All in the Family TV show, where he was always mispronouncing words. um, cloud them. TJ writes, how is economic classes made up in Canada? Here, 2/3 have it decent, 1/3 is thrown under the bus. I'm assuming, TJ, yeah, you're in the US. I've always found Canada, actually, I find the US more classist than Canada. I found Canada, I spent 10 years growing up in the United States, and I noticed that there's the private clubs, and the golf and golf and tennis clubs, and the gated communities and such. You don't see that here in Canada as much. The extremes in the United States are much greater. The wealthy are extremely wealthy, and the poor are incredibly poor. In Canada, it's not as extreme. Our wealthy are not as wealthy as Americans, but they're still very wealthy, and our poor are not as poor as the poor in the States, but they're still poor. But what's happening now is everyone's being pushed down. It's only the cream at the very top, and that's a poor term to use because I don't consider them to be cream at all. I consider them to be demonic. But everyone else is being pushed down. So that's about as much as I can say on class in this country. Laser distance meter is here. 2019, 1 kilogram of gold was almost half the price than now. So he's saying that in the last 5 years or so that the price of gold has doubled. I haven't checked into it. I've never been a gold investor. It's occurred to me that I might actually want to have some physical hard gold, silver, tangible metal. Not just pieces of paper representing, gold certificates or things like that, but to have the actual hard coin. But there are coinage fees. Life is hard, and gold and silver are expensive. TJ writes, it seems to me money system is two-tiered. Regular people have to pay their debts or go to jail. Not so the super rich or banks. There's an old saying in banking that if you owe the bank $100,000 and you can't pay them back, well, then you have a big problem. But if you owe the bank $100 million and you can't pay the bank back, well, then the bank has a problem. Oh, you can't. 100 million, you can't pay us back. We'll renegotiate this. We'll give you a longer amortization. We'll lower your payments. We'll forgive, we'll forgive part of it, but don't make me write off 100 million. 100,000. Oh, we're not going to send you to jail, but we're going to bankrupt you. We're going to take everything you have, and we're going to, just destroy your life. But if you owe us 100 million, you can't pay us back. Well, that's okay. We'll figure something out for you. The golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. That's the devil's golden rule. Everyone should know the real golden rule. God's golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Thomas writes, the 1% are playing Monopoly. Yeah, absolutely. Sharunian writes, did you hear about the tensions and protests happening in the UK because of what a 17? Yes. There's so many things happening in the world. I talked about that a while ago, about this was I think the kid was from Wales, born in Wales to parents who had emigrated to Wales from Rwanda in Africa. And then stories started to spread that the individual there was a Taylor Swift dance party or something like that, and 3 very young girls had been stabbed and killed. 7 or 8 more had been stabbed and severely injured, and then 2 or 3 adults were also stabbed before this kid was subdued. And it unleashed a firestorm, and there were claims that this kid, who was actually born in the UK, but to Rwandan immigrants, that he was Muslim, and there were violence at mosques and acts of vandalism, and the police were involved, overturning police cars. It was bad, and it's by design. Right now in Canada, 1,000 synagogues and Jewish institutions have been hit with bomb threats. And I've mentioned this before. I'll end it off here because I've been going on for 45 minutes already, and I normally don't do these during the day, but my workplace called and they said, instead of working today, could you come in tomorrow? And I was sure, why not? And so so I had today at home. But anyway, um, I see just so many things coming at us from so many different directions. The rail shutdown is now front and center, but then there's the health issue, COVID, monkeypox, bird flu, whatever they could hit us with on that front. Then we could have climate disasters and more wildfires or severe weather events like hurricanes. We're coming into hurricane season now. We could have weather events, so blame that on climate change. Then we could have terrorist events happening. You know, we could have synagogues and Jewish institutions getting blown up, or goodness knows. And then likewise with mosques and Islamic places of gathering and worship, they could be subject to terrorist type activity. And then we could have with the rail shutdown, that could cause economic collapse, our dollar cratering in value, the value of people's money turning into what happened in Germany during the Weimar Republic when hyperinflation came in. Who knows? And then eventually what I see happening is a government such as Canada's, and in tandem with other world governments, handing over control, ceding their autonomy to a world body, to some UN agency, to some emperor, and saying, we're facing global challenges that need a global solution. We can no longer be narrowly fixated on Canada's interests. We have to, throw in with everyone else. So we're going to be ceding our autonomy to this globalist body, and they will steer us through these difficult times. And then once we come out the other side, then we'll return to being a sovereign Canadian state, and it will never happen. We'll never get anything back. It's game over. Now we're into the beast. Now we're into maybe getting an actual physical mark on your hand or on your forehead. Things can get really bad. How long will it take? I'm almost in Christ. I know that I'm covered by the blood of the Savior of the world. And so no matter what comes, I'm going to be good. I'm not a lot of Christians believe in this rapture event where, there'll be just a pile of clothes and I'll be flying naked through the air and going to heaven. I don't know. Can God do that? Absolutely. God can do anything. Is that what's going to happen? I don't know. I think the second coming is the second coming. And that's what I'm looking forward to. Come, Jesus, come. Let the trumpet sound. Jesus come back riding in the clouds, and then I'll join with the saints in the air. And if we have to go to war, we go to war, whatever, however it's going to play out. And then there's victory in the end. And then the New Jerusalem and heaven on earth will be one. Anyway, finishing off. John 5 made it back. Hello again. Hope you caught up on everything that was said. TJ calls what's happening in the UK anti-whiteism. Oh yeah, and that exists. And there's a lot of self-hatred among European descended individuals. They hate themselves. They think that it's European colonialism which caused all the world's problems, and that is a lie. It's broken, fallen humanity, and every human being is broken or fallen, no matter whether they're from Europe, Africa, Asia. We're all broken, we're all fallen. The only thing that determines how evil we are is our capacity. The more capacity we have for evil, the more evil we do. When the African slave trade was going on, it was West Africans themselves who were selling their own brothers and sisters into slavery because they got to profit from it. All humanity is broken and fallen. And the only time we can reach a bit above, the only time that things get good is when we follow God's holy word, when we get into scripture and we try to align ourselves with God. We never get it perfect. We don't get it perfect, but as people far smarter than me often say, the perfect is the enemy of the good. We aim, people say, well, it's not perfect, so let's tear it all down, including all the good stuff. This world is not horrible. It's not perfect, but it's not as bad as this left-wing progressive woke crowd wants you to believe. They want you to believe that it's horrible, broken, and needs to be completely tore down, because basically at their core, they want anarchy. Thomas writes, for me, this time works much better. Otherwise, you're live when it's like 5 a.m. here. We'll see, because I'm taking some time off. So I'll do some during the day in the coming weeks. I'm taking the next 10 days off after tomorrow. So I'll start doing some more during the daytime. And I enjoy it, but I have to do it in this room. I have to do it in kind of a spare room here, because where I normally do it in the dining room there, the sun in the afternoon is at my back, and it's overexposed. And Thomas, yes, absolutely. Teams, WhatsApp, whatever works. Send me an email. We'll figure it out. And Sharunian writes that there are white people who come in shades of brown as well. I'll never do an ancestry test. I'm never handing my DNA to a private company to give me. I would be curious. I would like to know what's my ancestral background. You know, I can gather from what research I've done that I'm English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh. And based on the fact that I have an ancestor whose last name is La Rochelle, I assume there might be a French ancestor a little further back. But also, I happen to be B positive is my blood type, B positive, and I'm blue-eyed, which is a very I researched it a bit, and it's very rare, because the B positive blood type is almost exclusive to Asians and Native North Americans. And so I think I probably have some Native North American ancestry as well, because my dad's father and his family in that line came from Manitoulin Island, which is Ojibwe territory, unceded. And if you go back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, probably 98% of the population was native. So there's probably some ancestor on my dad's father's side. At some point, someone, there was a relationship between a white European and a native North American, an Ojibwe. So I probably, maybe 1/20th or something in my DNA, as evidenced by my blood type. Anyway, let's finish off what's being written. Thomas, yes, the email address is in the description. I'll tell you what it is now. Canadian, Canadian, Canadian soapbox @gmail. It's in the description to my channel. If you go to my channel, and it says to contact the creator or whatever I call myself, and I have the email address there. But Canadian soapbox @gmail, all one word, Canadian soapbox. Okay, Sharunian says that when he goes to the beach and sees white guys and gals with tans, yeah, I can tan up a little. I don't wear sunscreen anymore. I don't put that chemical stuff on my body, haven't for years. And TJ writes, the trees in the forest trusted the axe and did not object when he cut them down, because the axe was half wood himself. Oh yeah, you can. We'll see what happens. I mean, Monday's going to be when the rubber hits the road. Does CN, bringing this back to the subject line, are the rail workers going to go on strike? If the CN rail workers are on strike, that's roughly 2/3 of our network. And if CP hasn't unlocked its doors, although from what I understand, with CP, they're already in a legal strike position. They've already given the notification. So I don't believe, our rail network could be entirely shut down all weekend right into Monday. And then with numbnuts as our prime minister, and the only way to get things rolling again would be for him to end his vacation and reconvene the legislature. But even then, we're looking at a week or more before back to work legislation could be enacted. And by that time, it's pretty much too late. So if you're Canadian, fill up your tank, top it right up. load up on non-perishables. There's nothing you can do. Things like carrots and eggs and stuff that's going to spoil. There's no point loading up on that unless you can freeze it. But things could get bad. It's better to be, hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And if things get bad, who knows? The internet could go down. I'm sure there are components, routers, and different components that keep the internet working that rely on the rail network too. So, we may not have the internet. Who knows? The electrical grid may go down. Who knows? Thank goodness we're in summer. We got winter coming. Oil, heating oil that a lot of Canadians rely on, travels on the rails. So many things. I can't imagine they'd let it go on any longer, but I can't believe that they let it get as bad as it did already. John writes how our ancestors survived without sunscreen. No kidding. I now look at the news incredibly skeptically, and even the scientific community, because they keep changing the story all the time. They say, well, and we're told, well, the science evolved. Well, I'm just going to not use sunscreen and wait for it to evolve even more. Anyway, God bless. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you even in these troubling times. And may the Lord grant you, me, and this beastly world, may we be able to find peace. And the way to find peace is through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And if you're not in relationship with him, I invite you to open the Bible, start reading the gospel according to John. That's as good a place to start as any. Find a faithful church, find some Christians who are professing the Bible, and get into community, get encouraged, get built up, and build that relationship. God bless, and we'll talk to you all maybe tonight. And we'll see what happens in this crazy world.